Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Peckham Scoop with your host, Nick Peckham. And today we have a special guest. We have Matt back on the show. Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on last time. I'm happy that I did well enough for you to bring me on a second time. So I appreciate it.
I wanted to just start by saying I watched the women's Final Four last night, and Caitlin Clark, what a performance she put on against the number one team in the country. They were undefeated at the time. She had 41 points. I want to say 6 rebounds and 8 assists. She's the first player, I think, in NCAA tournament history, men's or women's, to have back-to-back 40-point games in the Elite Eight and the Final Four. And I think, if I saw correctly, she was the first person in NCAA tournament history, men's and women's, to have a triple-double in the Elite Eight their last game. So we are watching something that we haven't seen in forever in college basketball all around. But she put on an amazing performance. And listening to some of her interviews after the game yesterday, it's all about the team. She never once said anything about herself. Every question she answered was about all 15 players on the team and the coaching staff and the coach. So you love to see that from somebody who clearly is probably the most dominant women in women's college basketball right now. But I just wanted to start with that because I watched both games last night. They were both very good. And to see what Caitlin Clark did against a team that's won 42 straight and just dominate the way she did was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, she's a special player. Regardless, men's, women's. I mean, you could argue that she's just the best college basketball player out there. The most exciting college basketball player between both men's and women's games in there. I mean, you see Zach Edey and what he was able to do at Purdue. Obviously, that run fell short. But what Caitlin Clark is able to do on a basketball court is just, I mean, it's just fun to watch. I'll be honest. Like, it was kind of like when Jimmer Fredette was at BYU. You
Yeah.
just like, I got to turn on a game. I might not be a BYU fan. It might not be the biggest matchup, but you just have to watch him play. That's what it feels like with Caitlin Clark. She has a good team around her, but you just know that she elevates everyone else that she plays with. And I might not be an Iowa fan. I was born in Iowa, for what it's worth. I lived there for just under a year, so it counts a little bit. So I guess you could say I've got some Hawkeyes blood in me. So I am rooting for Iowa to to cut down the nets against LSU. That should be a good game. But I mean, she's just so fun to watch.
Yeah, it's the thing she was doing last night, the way she would just attack her change. I think the biggest thing I noticed was her change of speed in the game. So not at the beginning, not at the end, but as the game went on, she realized what would work and what wouldn't work. And her change of speed, I mean, arguably, Bria Bell is probably the best defender in women's college basketball that plays for South Carolina. And she was just blowing by her and dominating. And it was fun to watch. It was definitely fun to watch. And to see all the Iowa fans, especially for a game in Texas. I mean, obviously, Iowa and Texas aren't very close. So to see Iowa fans travel and support their team, it was pretty remarkable. It was something it's going to be a good championship game. I know LSU. I think they have Kim Mulkey now as their head coach. She's been there a couple of years. They got Angel Reese, who's one of the most dominant post players in women's college basketball. But I think it should be a good game. I'm just going to root for Iowa. I mean, it's been a special run, and I think they can keep it going. But on to the men's tournament. I had you on last week, and we talked about the opening weekend, and we talked about what we thought was going to happen in the Sweet 16. Well, the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight happened, and now we're in the Final Four. So we'll discuss this past weekend, and then we'll talk about the Final Four. We'll talk about the South region for the Sweet 16. We had Alabama, San Diego State, and then Creighton and Princeton. A shocker to many, San Diego State upsetting Alabama, and then Creighton going on their run, taking down Princeton. What were your takeaways from those two games?
Yeah, I think overall, I'll start with Creighton taking taking down excuse me, San
Richmond.
Diego State taking down Creighton in that one. I just thought throughout this whole tournament, San Diego State has been just a dominant defensive team. Like, you look at the offense in college basketball, and there's a lot of good offensive players. The AAU circuit, as you know, has kind of helped that out. I mean, there's so many great offensive players, but when you look at really that entire left side of the bracket between Florida Atlantic and San Diego State, it is just, if you like watching defense in college basketball, then you've got it right there. And I think San Diego State was able to do that. I'm sorry, what was the other game that you wanted to talk about there?
We had San Diego State upsetting Alabama, which to a lot of people was a massive thing. I know Brandon Miller really struggled in the 3 games in this tournament, never found his rhythm. I know a lot of people will say the outside noise finally caught up to Alabama, but as a basketball player and things like that, you kind of try to push as much to the side as you can to play a game. And it wasn't all on Brandon Miller. It was a team effort. But like you said, I think San Diego State, they've been one of the best defensive teams in college for the last 5, 6, 7 years. And they've been this good since the COVID year, even before. And the COVID year, when the tournament, when the conference tournaments got shut off like halfway in, and then they stopped the NCAA tournament. There was 2 teams that probably were the best 2 teams in college basketball at the time that probably would have, either of them could have won it. And it was San Diego State and Dayton at the time. And Dayton had the National Player of the Year and Obi Toppin, who now plays for my New York Knicks. I'm a huge Knicks fan. But this is nothing new. If you follow college basketball, San Diego State being this good is nothing new. They just finally have clicked on both sides of the ball, and that's been the biggest thing. I think we talked about it with Tennessee on our last show we did together. Tennessee and San Diego State are 2 teams that play great defense, but the question is always, can we get enough offensively out of them to move forward? And that's always been the big thing, especially it's not even those 2 teams, but usually we'll say the top 10 teams in college basketball most of the time are great defensively, but struggle offensively also. And to see them click on both sides of the floor is something fun. And I think I was talking to my buddy the other day about this, and I think the way that we seed NCAA tournament teams, I think the word mid-major, I think needs to leave. And because I know you've watched a ton of college basketball this year, and we'll go down and we'll talk about Florida Atlantic for a minute. But Florida Atlantic coming into this tournament was 31-3, and they were arguably one of the best teams in college basketball. Probably should have been ranked in the top 25 at some point towards the end of the season. But for them to get a 9 seed because they're a mid-major considered, it was kind of like they probably truthfully could have been a 4, as high as a 4, or anywhere in between a 4, 5, and 6. So this run to the Final Four is nothing that I would look at as a quote-unquote Cinderella, because they have been doing this all year. They just don't play these big-name teams, and they're not a big enough school to get that recognition.
Yeah, and I'm going to go down a rabbit hole here, but I think to that point, this is why I call for some sort of tournament expansion. And I don't know if that means all the way to 96 teams. I don't know if that just means maybe making it 80 teams. I just look at teams that got left out. You see the NIT championship between 2 Conference USA teams, UAB and North Texas. And it just seems to me like some of these teams are getting left out that shouldn't be. And you can go and argue it from the other way and say that, okay, the committee is just going to keep putting in the power conference teams. When it gets down to it, the power conference teams are the best teams on paper. They're the teams pulling in the recruits. They're the teams with the highest paid coaches, the best facilities. They should be the ones getting into the tournament. But these other schools in the mid-majors, like you mentioned, are they really mid-majors anymore? Because they're competing at a high level year in and year out. It might not be every team from those conferences. It's usually just 2 or 3 that make a run in March, but there's far fewer of them going up against these power conference teams. So I think that, again, taking this to a whole nother level, if you expand the tournament and allow some of those other teams to get in, they're more than deserving. I think that's a great way to showcase that college basketball has as much parity as it ever has been, and you see that with this Final Four.
Yeah, Jim Larinaga actually talked about that in his press conference this week when they were, I think they're in Houston for the Final Four. Mm-hmm. Can't remember. I'm having a brain fart. But he actually mentioned expanding it to 96 teams. And I think if you did that, it would be good for college basketball. It would obviously be good for the tournament. And I think what you could do is a lot of people are like, so you add another 32 teams from where you are now. But you could add two more. You have the South, the East, the West, the Midwest. You could add two more regions and split them all evenly. And even if you can't get the facilities, you could always do what the women's tournament does in their first 2 rounds, where the higher seed plays at home, or the higher seed in that little 4-game stretch, they play at home. And you could always do that. So obviously Houston being a number 1, Houston would have their first and their second round game in Houston at their facility. So you could always do things like that. But I think adding 32 more teams, I think, like you said, I watched the NIT championship. It was probably one of the best games of college basketball I watched all year. You had 2 of the best point guards in college basketball going head to head. And I know we discussed guard play on our last show about that's where it seems like it's going in college basketball nowadays. But you had 2 of them go head to head, and it came down to the wire. And I would look at, when I watched that game, I mean, some of those teams that North Texas beat and UAB beat on their way to the NIT championship, you can't tell me they couldn't at least made a run to the Sweet 16 in this year's tournament. So I do think expanding it is something that the committee is going to take a hard look at. And I want to see seeding differently a little bit. I don't like the mid-major word anymore, because college basketball is so level on all fields, with the transfer portal, with recruiting, with the NIL now where you can make money off your name. I don't think that you're going to have those big name schools anymore. It's going to be a level playing field across the board.
I agree. I mean, like, you, again, and we could talk about this so much, but you see that exemplified in the Final Four with the 4 teams that are in it. None of them from group of 5 power conferences. I consider the Big East a power conference. So you've got 1 power conference team in there in Connecticut. And you've got, when it comes down to it, Miami on that side, but the other side of the bracket, 2 mid-major schools. And I mean, even then, no one expected these 4 teams to make it. They're not you got 3 teams that are in their first Final Four in program history, and you've got all the big name teams getting eliminated. And even the big name teams are changing year to year. Like Alabama basketball being on top of the world is something new. That's something to get used to, because Alabama basketball, they haven't even been a top half SEC team for however long I can remember, as long as I've been watching college basketball. So the whole landscape is changing. And I know that this has been something that's gone on like in the past. Like UNLV was one of the top teams in college basketball for a period of time when Jerry Tarkanian was their head coach. You don't really hear much about UNLV anymore. Some teams just go in waves. You've got the Blue Bloods that will always be there, the Dukes, the Kansas, the Kentuckys, but it's widening. The gap is closing between the top teams and the bottom teams. And you're really seeing it all around. I'll even go to the women's game too. You see that with the women's game. UConn hasn't made, or they get eliminated before the Elite 8 even is played this year. It was the first time since 2005. Like seeing this, you're seeing more teams on the women's side. And it's good for basketball. And I guess I'll close with this is that, expanding the tournament, you might think that it maybe hurts the regular season because you allow many more teams in. But when it gets down to it, only 20% of college basketball teams, as it is right now, make the NCAA tournament. There's over 350 teams and only 64 make it. You look at all the pro leagues, you can look at college football where half the teams make bowl games. the NCAA tournament in college basketball, it is the least amount of teams reaching the postseason. I'll throw out the NIT and everything. I mean, it's good basketball, but come on, it's not the same.
Yeah.
So I just think that overall, I mean, you add some teams, you still wouldn't, it's not like we're talking about like 128 teams in the tournament. It's still less than 100 teams in. You add great competition, and to both of our points here, you get these teams that are no longer mid-majors, and you get them a chance to play for it all.
Yeah, I mean, on your point, I mean, you follow Big East a lot more than I do. Not recently, ever since Syracuse went to the ACC, but UConn, I'm pretty sure a couple of years ago, UConn was at the bottom of the Big East before Hurley took over, and he really turned that program back around to where it was back in the Jim Calhoun days and the couple seasons that Kevin Ollie was there when he had, oh my God, Shabazz Napier. And they went on their magical run to win the championship. But, I mean, this tournament is probably the biggest example of anybody can be anybody nowadays in college basketball. This is the first time I think that we've been in a Final Four, and none of the top 3 seeds are in it. The highest seed in it is UConn at 4. Miami was a 5, I'm pretty sure. Mm-hmm. Yep, a 5. San Diego State was a 5, and FAU is a 9. So your highest seed is UConn at 4, and maybe some people would say UConn was a little underranked at 4 because, again, they had a great start to their season. They kind of hit Big East play, and it kind of leveled out a little bit, but they started playing extremely well recently. But we'll talk about the Final Four games now. We'll talk about our first game, San Diego State and FAU. What are your takes on the game, and who do you think comes out on top?
I think that this will be more offensive than people give it credit for. I think some people think this is going to be like a 45-43 game. I don't think that, because I think when two defensive teams, as they are, clash, there's bound to be more transition points because, there's going to be more steals. You're going to see – I'm not saying it's going to be a 70-70 game, but it's not going to be this low-scoring game that people are saying. I think it's going to be – what both of these teams have played throughout the tournament. Like, it could be like a 65-60 game, like your average low-scoring college basketball game. I don't think it's going to be anything too lower than that. If I had to pick a team to come out on top, though, I'm going to go with San Diego State. I think that FAU, and I know that you've had time to relax and rest from that. I just feel like for FAU, and you see this a lot with these teams that make the Final Four totally unexpectedly, I think it might catch up with them a little bit. I think San Diego State maybe is a little bit more polished. I don't want to say more mature because I know that FAU has a very good senior-led group, but something just tells me that Brian Dutcher's group in the Aztecs, you got Matt Bradley, you got Nathan Mensah, guys that have played in big games before. I think that they're going to respond better to what the Final Four is. I mean, it's a big scene. It's tough to handle for Florida.
Big stage.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be tough. So I think it's going to be a close game. I don't think either team is really capable of blowing the other out just because of their styles of play, unless one of them just has a horrendous shooting night. And I think it'll be close, but I believe that San Diego State's going to move on to the championship.
Yeah, I'm with you on I think it's going to be a close game. We've seen FAU play physical teams already. We've seen them play Tennessee, who might be they look like they're a bunch of grown men playing at Tennessee. And the physicality didn't bother them like a lot of people thought it would. We've seen FAU play a game against a team like Kansas State who can get up and down. And so in their last 2 games, we've seen a game where they can go slow tempo and play that physical style. And we've also seen a game where they can play up tempo a little bit and get after it. And I think FAU they play this unique style of basketball that I think you need to see in college basketball more, where they get into you and they pressure you and things like that. And they're relentless and they play. I'm pretty sure if I'm correct, I'm pretty sure they play 8 or 9 guys, which nowadays these big name schools, you kind of cut once you hit the tournament, your rotations kind of cut down a little bit, especially with veteran coaches. I don't know. This is a tough game. This is a huge toss-up to me. I do think FAU will pull it out in the end. I'm going to go FAU here. It's going to be amazing to see you're either going to get San Diego State or FAU in a national championship game. If we would have talked about this at the beginning of the tournament, probably would have never said that. But you're going to get one of these teams in the tournament or in the championship game, I should say. And I'm going to throw a couple names at you that I think it's going to come down to the last 5 minutes. It's going to be close, and it's going to be what team can make bigger plays in crunch time on a massive stage. And I'm going to look at a couple guys from FAU. I'm going to look at Janelle Davis, who's been that guy for FAU on this run in the tournament. He's closed games for this team. Michael Foster was massive against Kansas State down the stretch. But my X factor for this game is going to be their center. Their 7-foot center. I forgot what his name was. Hold on, I'm looking it up right now. Golden. He's 7'1", and I think with San Diego State having two big men who are very physical, and what he did against Kansas State, I think Golden is going to be a massive X factor in this game. I think FAU is going to pull it out in a close one down the stretch, and we can't forget about Jalen Gaffney. I know you know him. He played at UConn. He started his career at UConn. He's now at FAU, and he's in the rotation. And I think having a guy who's been in a big conference and played big games before could also help in the locker room and just getting these guys to calm down a little bit. But I think it's going to be a very close game. I'm going to go FAU, and I think Janelle Davis is going to take over down the stretch. But it's going to be exciting to see either San Diego State or FAU in a national championship game. And I think it's good for college basketball on the flip side. Our other Final Four game, probably the more anticipated game of the two. You have Miami out of the ACC and you have UConn out of the Big East. Now, you talk about two teams that play a completely different style of basketball, and you talk about Miami, whose center is 6'7". He's forward in many conferences. He plays center for Miami, and then you look at UConn, who plays 2 7-footers. And I know we talked about UConn Gonzaga and UConn Arkansas being a battle of the bigs, and the bigs have dominated. And UConn has dominated the field. Anyone that's been put in front of them, they've dominated on their way here. I think UConn's biggest, their most uneven half of any game was probably their first half against Iona, when I think it was tied, or it was a 2-point game at halftime, and then they dominated the second half, and they've dominated ever since. Who do you got in this game, and what is your biggest takeaway?
So I'll start with, I think the one thing to watch is foul trouble, because you see Gonzaga, Drew Timme gets in foul trouble. That game opens wide open for Connecticut. That could be the same thing for Miami if Norchad Omier gets in foul trouble. I know he's an undersized center to begin with, but if his minutes have to be restricted in the game because of too many fouls, who does Miami turn to? From the other perspective, Connecticut doesn't – I think we talked about this a little bit. Connecticut has good guards, but they don't really have a true point guard. I think that if Jim Larinaga can pull off a full-court press, that could really turn the game in Miami's favor, especially if they can just speed Connecticut up. Now, I know that Connecticut can play fast. They've got shooters to go along with their big men. I think the smart pick here would be to go with Connecticut, but I think the player to watch for me is Isaiah Wong. I know that Jordan Hawkins was feeling under the weather the other day, so that's another thing to watch. But Isaiah Wong, to me, is the most box office player in this game, maybe in the tournament left. I mean, he can get going from the mid-range, from three. He'll drive the basketball. He's got Nigel Pack right as his sidekick, who can also, fill up the box score. I think that if Isaiah Wong gets going, I do like Miami to win this game. But with that being said, I mean, like UConn is the smart pick here. I just feel like Miami has the guys, the guards that can both, get hot and really turn it in their favor.
Yeah, you made a great point. My biggest takeaway, I think, from the UConn Gonzaga game, and I know we talked about it, putting Drew Timme on Andre Jackson and having him play off, I think killed that team. I think teams are starting to play off of Andre Jackson because he's not a strong three-point shooter, and he kills you with his passing ability, with his driving ability. And I think that's something that teams have to look at, like, okay, maybe we should get up and press him just a little bit, because he really he almost had a triple-double against Gonzaga, and he really took that game over. But like you said, Drew Timme getting in foul trouble killed them because they didn't really have anywhere else to go. I know they have a couple players that can hold the scoring load, but they couldn't find it. And after they got down 15 points, it was kind of like 15 points against UConn is like 25 against most teams because of the style of play that they play. I've watched Miami all year. I'm a big ACC guy, and I think you hit it spot on. I think foul trouble is going to be a huge thing in this game. Miami depth wise doesn't really have much. I mean, they have Anthony Walker who comes off the bench who gives them a little bit more size, but I think your two most important players in this game, I think Isaiah Wong, like you said, is one of them. And I think Jordan Miller has to play like he did against Texas, where I'm pretty sure I don't think he missed a shot from the field or the free throw line all game. And he dominated. But like you said, having Nigel Pack in a game like this, you saw it when Miami played Houston. Nigel Pack had 7 threes. He scored 26 points, and he was ready for that matchup. And I think they're going to need that type of play from Nigel Pack and Isaiah Wong today to both be – or tonight, I should say, to both be dominant. I do think if Jordan Hawkins ends up playing, which I've heard that it's gearing towards him playing, he may be under the weather a little bit. But I think an interesting matchup in this game is Woogie Pobler against Jordan Hawkins, because Miami likes to play a lot of press and man. And I think if he can get into Hawkins, especially Hawkins being under the weather, he's probably not going to be 100%. I think that could change this game a little bit. But I don't know, honestly. It's hard to go against UConn just because of the way that they've rolled through this tournament and everybody in front of them. But I think I'm going to go with Miami here. And I think Miami having that experience of making it to the Elite Eight last year, and a lot of these guys coming back and being hungry, I think Miami might make a couple more threes. And I think if this game gets up, this is how I'll put it. If this game gets up high scoring anywhere above 70, I think Miami wins. If UConn can keep it under 70 or at the 70 mark, I think UConn wins. But I'm going to go with Miami here. And wow, to see Miami in the national championship game would be absolutely amazing for them, for Jim Larinaga. But it should be an interesting weekend for sure. It'd be fun to see a Miami FAU national championship game because I feel like they both kind of play the same style of basketball. But it's hard to pick against UConn the way that they've played in this tournament. That's for sure. So now we'll talk about the transfer portal. I know this is a big thing in college basketball, and the last couple of days, there's been a lot of big name players to hit the transfer portal. Yesterday, Hunter Dickinson from Michigan put his name in the transfer portal as a graduate transfer and probably jumped up to the top of the number one player in the portal, I would imagine. He dominated last year at Michigan. I know a lot of people are leaving Michigan. They had a disappointing year for all aspects, saying the talent that they had on that team. But what do you think of all the players in the transfer portal? I think we're over 1,000 now. And I know we've kind of touched on it before, but is it getting a little out of hand, or is this a good thing for the future of college basketball?
Yeah, I think, obviously at 1,000 already, and it probably won't be stopping anytime soon. You're going to see more guys entering the portal in the next week or two. You're just under about 3 transfers per team if you break it down that way in college basketball. 12, 13 guys on a team. So about 25% of the guys per team are transferring. Obviously, that's different from team to team. Some guys, now I don't know the numbers. I'm assuming some teams haven't had one, could have 0 guys that have transferred yet. Other teams, they might have 5 or 6, depending on the situation. I do think that in a sense it's getting out of hand, but I think that it's going to even itself out over time. Like, I just think that we're at the height of it right now because of NIL being so new, because of players, it's so different now being able to transfer where like 5, 6 years ago, you couldn't do it this easily. So I think that players are just excited to be able to do it. I don't think it's ever going to slow down completely, but I just feel like right now we're kind of at the height of it all. It's just kind of like an exciting thing to do. I mean, you want to try new things. I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing for college basketball. I mean, the top guys aren't transferring. Like even Hunter Dickinson. I mean, it's not like this guy's like a first-team All-American, and then he wants to become another first-team All-American. Like, he's definitely a great player, but I just think that it is what it is, and I think that it's one of those things where if you don't like it, then you're going to have a tough time really liking college basketball. You might not have to agree with all of it, but it's something that you just kind of got to get used to because it's the way that it is. It's the way the game's moving to. So it's better to just kind of accept it for what it is than get upset about the portal. With that being said, I do hope that it calms down a bit. I mean, you'd like to see a little more consistency.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on 24/7 Sports now, just looking at some of the names, and I'll just throw a couple out that have transferred recently in the last couple of days. You've had Hunter Dickinson, you've had Quadeus Wahab from Georgetown, you've had Jordan Davis, who's Johnny Davis's little brother from Wisconsin, Olivier from Tennessee, who had a great game against Duke. You've had Ace Baldwin from VCU, who put his name in. He was the A10 Player of the Year. You've had, just going down the list, Caleb Mills from Florida State.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of big-name players. You've had a 5-star center who committed to Oregon last year and kind of had some injuries here and there. He just put his name in the portal. So, I mean, there's a lot of teams out there, and I know a big thing is with the coaching changes, you see a lot of these players are from schools where their coaches left. Like, I think VCU in the last couple of days after Mike Rhodes left, I think 7 or 8 people entered the portal. And you'd imagine that, especially with coaches leaving. I do think the portal helps college basketball for sure. I mean, you're seeing a lot of these teams like Miami adding Nigel Pack and Omier, 2 other key players in their starting 5 are both from the portal. Obviously, FAU, they are a bunch of seniors. They've built this team and they've ran with this team. UConn doesn't have many transfers, I would say. Hurley's doing a very good job recruiting, and to get Jordan Hawkins to come back for this year was a massive upgrade. But onto the Big East. There's been a lot of news recently coming out of the Big East. Obviously, with the coaching changes and everything like that, you had Ed Cooley to Georgetown, Rick Pitino to St. John's, Kim English coming to Providence. A couple things in the last couple days that we'll talk about. Is it interesting? So I know you know Rick Pitino from his Louisville days, obviously, and then watching him at Iona. To go into St. John's and only keep one player, which is Joel Soriano, is it kind of interesting to you knowing how Rick Pitino likes to play, like his style of play, that some of their guards kind of transferred out? Because when I think of Rick Pitino, especially back at the Louisville days in the Big East and even early, I think the first 2 years in the ACC, he was very press-oriented, get up and down, and he had very good guards. Peyton Siva, Russ Smith, Kevin Ware, just a handful of guys, but they've always had really good guards. And watching St. John's, especially in the tournament and at the end of the year, I watched St. John's a little bit more. Their guards were guys that you looked at like that could be a Rick Pitino guard. And to see him take their center, who was probably their best player, and everybody else leave, is that kind of interesting to you in a way?
It is. I got to throw one more out there for you too. Edgar Sosa is one that comes to mind.
Yep.
That is a name that I have not thrown out in a while, but that brings me back to when I first started watching college hoops. You have a great point. I mean, you see Posh Alexander putting his name in the transfer portal, and I kind of look at it from the perspective. I don't know Posh Alexander. I don't want to speak for him, but he did not perform to the level that I think people thought he would this year. He had a really great freshman season, improved a bit sophomore year. I think I thought that he was a dark horse to win Big East Player of the Year in my preseason predictions. He didn't come close to that. And you see this with the entire St. John's backcourt. What is it? Andre Curbelo transferring for the second straight year now.
He, speaking of him, he actually talk about, I know you brought up Posh and having a down year. Andre had a very disappointing year for St. John's, with all due respect from what he showed at Illinois to what he showed now. But yeah, Andre entered the portal. They had, literally, I think everybody but Joel Soriano is in the portal.
It's ridiculous. And it's kind of like, I just don't know if it's okay. Like, I don't want to go through a rebuilding year. Like, maybe they think that it's going to be rebuilding, but it's like, do you not have trust in Rick Pitino? Iona didn't have any rebuilding. Iona just all of a sudden became a contender, every year in the MAAC. And you kind of thought they might be able to pull off an upset against UConn this year for how they were playing.
Yeah, I know a lot of his Iona players entered the portal, especially his guards. I've heard a couple of them connected to St. John's. But when I think of Rick Pitino, I think of New York City, hard-nosed, don't take no shit type of guards. Mm-hmm. And you had that in Alexander. Alexander was probably one of the best guards. I mean, yes, he had a down year, but his down year was still better than some players' good years at the end of the day. And Andre Curbelo, I mean, maybe he's not your prototypical guard for Rick Pitino, and maybe he just maybe St. John's and being in New York City just didn't fit for him. But Alexander, and then there was their shooting guard. I can't think of his name right now. It'll come to me in a second. But he also, and it just reminds you, like, it's crazy that they hit the portal like this. And maybe Rick Pitino has a plan, and I'm sure he has a plan on what he wants to do, but it was baffling to me. I talked to my buddy the other day. He's a big Syracuse fan, obviously, but he loves the Big East, and we talk about Syracuse going back to the Big East all the time. And he was like, "Can you believe all these players from St. John's that have hit the portal, and they remind you of Rick Pitino players?" And I'm like, maybe Rick Pitino is looking at this like year one. I got to make a difference. We've talked about it. He's 72 years old. He signed a 6-year deal. Can't imagine he coaches longer than 78. So maybe he's looking at this like in year one, I gotta make noise, especially in the Big East. I gotta make noise. So that's what he's trying to do. But I'll be very interested to see who he grabs. I know they haven't reached out to him yet, but I have heard rumors that St. John's could reach out to Joe Girard from Syracuse, because Rick Pitino likes his IQ, and obviously his shooting could go far in the Big East. I know he had a bunch of home interviews last week with a bunch of schools, so I don't know where that's going to go from there. But it was very interesting to me. Now, I want to talk about Providence for a minute. Mm. So Ed Cooley, we talked about Ed Cooley leaving in conference to go to Georgetown. Mm-hmm. Kim English taking over at Providence. Well, Providence had in the last 2 days are bringing back Bryce Hopkins and Devin Carter, who were probably their best two players from their team last year. And they're actually having an official visit coming up with one of the top centers on the market, Ike. I think his name is Graham Ike. Mm-hmm. He's actually coming to Providence. So I want to know with Bryce Hopkins and Devin Carter coming back, obviously you're a Big East guy and you follow the Big East. Is that something that you think Kim English can build on and they can repeat what they did last year this season with the right pieces around them?
Yeah, I mean, this to me looks like a fantastic hire right off the bat. I mean, it just seems like Kim English is a player's coach. Like, people want to play for him. I saw that video where he was like playing, I forget who the player was, but someone that entered the transfer portal, and he was like, hey, I'll play you one-on-one to come back to Providence. And it was just like, a funny thing. Like, you can tell he cares about the players. Like, he's not hurt if guys want to leave. He definitely wants to bring in the talent. And he's a name that I think people are going to need to get used to. I mean, he has shot up the ranks. He's still a very young coach, going to be coaching in the Big East, probably going to learn the hard way. But the fact that a guy like Bryce Hopkins is coming back, a guy like Devin Carter is coming back, I mean, this is a Providence team that you've got to continue to watch now. And I just feel like he might be able to take them to even higher lengths than Ed Cooley did. I mean, Kim English looks like that good of a coach right now, at least recruiting-wise. And gosh, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to watch how he does. And from the flip side, I'll just say a quick, congrats to Tony Skim, former Seton Hall assistant who just got the George Mason job. So that's cool for him as well.
Yeah. I think I forgot to mention, I think George Mason's best player who was in the portal, Josh Odoro.
Yes.
He averaged 15 and 8. I think he committed to Providence.
Yep.
With Kim English. So you're bringing back Bryce Hopkins, who arguably was I think he made first team All Big East. You're bringing back Devin Carter, who had a great year, and you're adding your best player from George Mason, who's a stretch 4 and can dominate inside. So you have 3 guys that you can build on. I know you have one of the top centers in the portal coming in for a visit. So Kim English is taking this, I think, and like you said, I think he's going to be great with this. Speaking of assistants getting hired, Villanova's assistant I just saw got hired. I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but obviously being a big Knicks fan, we have Jalen Brunson and Josh Hart, who both played at Villanova, and they were congratulating him on Twitter and everything. But now I want to flip this to Ed Cooley in Georgetown. So a lot of Georgetown guys left. You're talking Quadeus Wahib, Josh Primo, Brandon Murray. A lot of these guys have entered the portal. I know Georgetown, I think a couple guys may have committed to Ed Cooley at Georgetown. I can't remember. I'd have to look it up. But I have heard rumors. Again, I don't know how true this is, so please do not take this with anything. I've heard rumors that Ed Cooley is trying to meet with Bronny James about possibly coming to Georgetown, and I heard the mayor of D.C. is involved in this as well. Obviously, Bronny is coming to college next year, or might be coming to college next year, and hasn't committed yet to anywhere. I'd imagine he'd stay on the West Coast because of his family, but you never know. But I heard that could be a thing that Ed Cooley wants to make a massive splash at Georgetown. And I don't know how much bigger you could get in year one than landing Bronny. But where do you see Georgetown going from here? And is this going to be a quick rebuild? Or do you think this is going to be something that Georgetown fans are going to have to 2, 3, maybe 4 years before they get pulled out of basically the bottom of the dumpster?
Wow. First off, that would be something. That would be something. If that's true, that would be something crazy.
I mean, I know when you think of Georgetown, right, you think of guys like Allen Iverson and guys like that have played there. So, I mean, I could see them getting a meeting with Bronny. I don't know if he'd commit there, but to get a meeting in general would probably be a massive win.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be insane. Here's the way I look at it. When Kevin Willard took the Maryland job, and I'm comparing this because Maryland and Georgetown are both in the same market, I know that Maryland fans, the consensus was he needs to make the tournament in like his second or third year on campus. He makes it in his first. But I think that Maryland was in a bit of better shape than Georgetown. I mean, Georgetown's at the bottom of the bottom, and Maryland's a little bit easier to recruit to because it's like a little bit outside of that DC. Like Georgetown is in DC, where it is not the biggest game. You've got the Wizards, you've
The
got the
Capitals.
Nationals, you've got the Capitals, you've got my Commanders,
Yep.
you've got 4 other games in town. It's a little bit difficult when you're not the top priority. I know that Georgetown can be the top priority or one of the top priorities because we know they have a history, but you've got to be the right guy for the job. And for that reason, I think that Ed Cooley has the potential to bring it there, but I think that it's going to take a little bit longer. I don't see this Georgetown team going from what they went like 7 games this year
Yeah.
to like 20 games in an NCAA tournament bid in year 1. I will say that with the transfer portal, it's easier to improve teams now. If you're a good recruiter, you can get a couple good transfers to come in, and you can definitely turn a team around easier than you used to be able to. But I still think that it's going to take a year or two because it's going to be tough to get people to come to that program after what it has been for the past couple of years.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for Ed Cooley was maybe in the back of his mind, maybe he thought that a couple of his players would follow him from Providence. And obviously the best 2 players on the team last year stayed with Kim English at Providence. I know there's a lot behind that. I know there's reports that he had this deal in place with Georgetown before the season even ended. And he didn't really care too much in the tournament. And again, you never know what's true until it comes out of somebody's mouth from like Ed Cooley himself. But I know there was a lot behind that. But like you said, I think with the transfer portal, I think the biggest thing for Ed Cooley in year 1, coming off of maybe 1 or 2 conference wins and 7 or 8 wins total, I think the biggest thing in year 1 is maybe hit the transfer portal and get a couple guys who can build a culture. Even if they're guys that are graduate transfers that maybe can't land at a top school, you get two of those guys to come here and you build something. That's what it's gonna take to bring this program back up. And like you said, I think with the portal, it's a little bit easier to do those type of things nowadays as opposed to 10, 15, 20 years ago when there wasn't the portal or guys had to sit out a year. I mean, I think he's going to have to build a culture and build a winning program before they can even think about taking leaps and being contenders again. But onto a positive note, we'll talk about Syracuse basketball for a minute. I know we talked about Adrian Autry taking over and everything, but I will say it's only been, 3 weeks, maybe just over 3 weeks since everything happened. I will say that it has been a massive hire so far. We haven't played any games yet. So far, it's been a massive hire. I mean, you look at just some of the things that they've done. They added a 5-star JJ out of the portal to get JJ to come home. Benny Williams and Chris Bell announced they were coming back. Judah obviously is going to try the combine, but he maintained his eligibility. I know there's talks around Syracuse that Judah could come back. He wants to go to the combine to see what he has to work on and what he has to improve to get better. I'm hearing rumors that Jesse Edwards could come back. Obviously, Malik Brown, Justin Taylor, Kadir Copeland. The expectations is for them to come back. So you look at this team, and if everybody came back, you'd look at a starting lineup somewhere along the lines of Judah, JJ, Chris Bell, Benny, Jesse, with a bench of Malik Brown, Justin Taylor, Copeland. Maybe Hema gets better, or maybe you add a center. But they just had a massive assistant coach hire that they announced yesterday or 2 days ago with Brendan Stratton from George Washington, who, from what I've heard from people at George Washington, he's a great recruiter, relationship builder, one of the top young assistant coaches in the game, and he has strong ties to the DMV. Funny story about that is Brandon Stratton was Judah's middle school basketball coach, so there's a connection there. If Judah comes back, I know people look at everything when they look at connections, but I've heard Syracuse's name in Hunter Dickinson. I've heard that could be one of the top 3 places he looks at because of the ties to the DMV, and Brandon Stratton actually coached him in the AAU circuit. Syracuse just landed an official visit from Donnie Freeman for April 6th to the 8th. So at the end of this upcoming week, which is a massive 4-star, possibly 5-star recruit. So, I mean, things are looking up. I don't know. I'm sorry, Syracuse fans, to say this. I don't know if Benny Williams and Chris Bell come back in Boeheim's hair. I just think they might have been in the doghouse too much and they may look to move elsewhere. But it's been a very good hire so far. I'm also hearing that Syracuse, so I know I think it's every 4 or 5 years, college programs can go on summer trips and they can play exhibition games. They go on like this. I know 5 years ago, Syracuse went to Italy and they played like 4 or 5 games in Italy. 5 years before that, they went to Canada when Ennis was here and they played a nice little trip in Canada. But I think if they took this summer trip and really built this team and Adrian Autry got a chance to coach and put his style in, I think it would do wonders for them going into the season. Syracuse is in the Maui Invitational this year. Mm-hmm. It's an absolutely loaded field.
Oh my goodness.
You're talking Kansas, Tennessee, Purdue. I know there's more. I think like the 2 bottom feeders were Syracuse and Shamadan are the 2 that are in there. And everybody else was a top 15 team, top 10 team even at some point this year. I know you graduated from Syracuse. I know you follow Syracuse basketball. It just feels like a good time. It feels like a breath of fresh air, and it feels like things could be changing with us being back to where we were.
It does. It does. I think that I like how you put it. I mean, if you get a Judah JJ backcourt, that automatically screams like great defensive capabilities for zone and man. Offense shouldn't really take a step back. I know that you may lose some of the shooting that Joe Girard had. I know that Joe Girard could also come back, but I have a feeling he's probably going to leave. And I think that's the best decision for both sides. I think that he's been great for Syracuse, but I'd like to see him, have success elsewhere. I definitely think he brought a lot of good to Syracuse. I'd like Jesse to come back. I still want Syracuse. I think it'd be great if they went out and got like a really good guy out of the portal. I mean, Hunter Dickinson would be amazing if Jesse doesn't come back. If Jesse does come back, then I mean,
I think Hunter Dickinson, if Jesse decides to leave, I think Hunter Dickinson would be, I won't say perfect player for a team like this, but with his ability inside and his passing ability, I think if Judah came back, having 2 guys who can attack like Judah and JJ do, to have a guy like Hunter Dickinson who can step out and hit a 15 to 17 mid-range shot would be massive. But like you said with the transfer portal, I think Syracuse, I think their biggest weakness that I think they're going to address is shooting. I think they need to bring in a guy, especially with Joe leaving. I think they need to bring in a guy that can be a knockdown shooter. I know a lot of people were talking about Justin Moore potentially leaving, but he just announced that he was returning to Villanova for his 5th year. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think shooting was probably their biggest need now. I know they've reached out to Chance Westry, who was a top 40 recruit that went to Auburn. Kind of didn't work out. I know they reached out to him. Syracuse was high on him coming out of high school. But with Joe leaving, I think getting another shooter is a massive get.
I think so. I think like this team, that's one box they need to check off. But I mean, especially with Chris Bell returning, that's one shooter coming back. If Malik Brown were to return, that's an inside presence back, someone that showed a lot of potential. Like Syracuse just has so many players that are coming back right now. And I was kind of thinking it was going to be the opposite. I mean, you have a coaching change. It seems like there's going to be a big philosophy change. I was like, all right, it's probably going to be a big overhaul. The fact that there's consistency with this roster right now is actually the most surprising and the most pleasant part. I think it is a good thing. I'm like, wow, okay, I like this.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of talks with people. My biggest 2 question marks, truthfully, were Benny and Chris Bell. I figured Malik Brown, Justin Taylor, Copeland, I figured those 3 would be back because they played massive minutes down the stretch and got that playing time. I think Benny's ties with Adrian Autry pulled him back in. And from what I've heard, Chris Bell had conversations with Adrian Autry and Alan Griffin about how they plan to use him next year, and he's very excited about it. I know we talk about shooting. Chris Bell is a guy who could be that shooter. I know we don't necessarily have to hit the portal. It'd be nice to add another shooter. I know Chris Bell could definitely be that guy with a bigger opportunity. It was tough. He had a tough freshman year. He had some games where he looked really good. I know Jim Boeheim used to call him out in his press conferences about his lack of rebounding after every game, and I know people look at that like it was a bad thing. I look at it like he was telling Chris Bell what he needs to do to stay on the floor, and just trying to get it out there so he can hear it. But yeah, I think it's a really good thing that a lot of these guys are staying. I mean, you have Syracuse has 3 guys who have hit the portal: John Bolajak, Symir Torrance, and Joe Girard. Obviously, Joe and Symir are both graduate transfers. It makes sense for them to leave if Judah and JJ are there next year. They probably won't they'd be bench guys, right? They'd be backup guards, and they both deserve an opportunity to start somewhere. John Bolajak obviously didn't get the playing time at Syracuse that he probably thought he would have. Great guy off the court, great guy on the court. One of the guys that is cheering for the team every time. First one out of the huddle, clapping. I wish him nothing but the best moving forward. But I'm very excited for next season. I will say I've actually looked at season tickets for next year. I think it could be a special season, barring Judah and Jesse potentially coming back. But yeah, I think if Jesse comes back, it really takes this team to another level. Especially the way he played down the stretch. I think if he can be consistently like that, I know. So I'm a big numbers guy, and I look at numbers for guys. And watching Jesse, I feel like Jesse could definitely average anywhere between 15 and 9, 16 and 10 a game. I know a lot of people are like, how can you do that in college? It's not that hard when you really think about it. But I think if Jesse could consistently give a team 15 and 10 on a nightly basis, it opens so much for this team.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think Jesse's kind of like that difference maker. Again, while Hunter Dickinson would be nice, Jesse Edwards, I mean, you're kind of comparing, like, they're both great players in their own right. We obviously know what Dickinson's capable if that were to happen, but Jesse Edwards, I mean, he's a guy that's done a lot of good for Syracuse basketball, and if he comes back, I think the improvements would be there. And again, you have the consistency, and you look at kind of tying it all back together right now. You look at the Final Four, a lot of these teams have consistency. I mean, I know that Miami kind of built through the portal, but Isaiah Wong was still a guy that was there last year.
Jordan Miller was.
Jordan Miller. I mean, you look at Connecticut, how we mentioned their recruiting, and you know, they didn't really build that team through the portal. The portal's a great tool, but getting consistency is really the bigger factor.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I don't have anything else on my menu. I'm sure within the next couple days from now until next week, we'll see a lot more players enter the portal, especially after the tournament's over and things like that, and everything calms down a little bit. But thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. I will definitely have you on again. Maybe we'll do something before the season starts, and we'll talk about finalized rosters after everybody kind of moves around in the transfer portal here and there. But
Yeah,
I appreciate you for coming on. Thank you.
Anytime, man.